People who quit their jobs on the first day. What was your I'm outta here moment? Worked in a hotel for a day. No one told me where anything was. Got chewed out for it. Guests enjoying their meals told me to pay no mind / I was doing a good job and that my boss is a jerk. I told the manager that I was quitting and wouldn't be doing the next shift. I arrived the next day, returning a work uniform, and my supervisor approached me and yelled at me for being late. I told her I already quit, but if I was working, technically I was 5 hours early for my shift. Absolute nutcases. Next story. Fast food chain. I was 17. I found out during training that the place had been robbed 3 times in the past month and one employee was seriously injured. Not worth the $5 per hour. Edit, for those asking about the pay and the time, this was the US state of Georgia in 2004. Next story. Applied for a job at my longtime favorite restaurant, celebrated my birthday there every year. Owner asks me to come in for basically a tryout, as I communicated I was looking at other job possibilities. I come in and they just stick me on dishwashing for an hour, no biggie. Then their dishwasher doesn't show up, so the kitchen manager asks me to stay one for their lunch rush. Saya, I'll get paid for the hours. I do. Kitchen staff was nice, so I was happy to help out even though I figured I'd be taking a different job. I fill out a time card at the end of the shift and tell the manager I probably wouldn't be back. He understands and thanks me for the help. Fast forward a couple weeks and he tells me to email the owner after I ask him if I should pick up my measly paycheck. I do. She basically tells me to F off over text. Tells me it was staging and that she told me I wouldn't be paid. I respond that I understand that, but that I stayed an extra 3 hours which I was told I'd be paid for. She stops responding. I decide I want to be petty over the $40, so I get the stat labor department involved. Dude goes in there and makes her pay me for the hours including the first staging hour. Couple weeks later I got my $40. Never went back to that restaurant. Edit. Firstly, petty is not how I see it 2 years later. I'm very glad I did this, and sharing the story with others in my city I learned this practice was very common with local restaurants. Hopefully others learn to stand up for their labor too from my small experience. Secondly, this restaurant closed down a couple weeks after I got that paycheck. The owner made a long-winded complaint on the FB page about how the food culture had changed in the city and her restaurant didn't fit in anymore. Total crap. They were always popular. Most people theorized the terrible mismanagement and employee abuse had caught up to her. Next story. My very first job was at a little drive-in restaurant close to my high school. I showed up to work the first day. The lady said I had to pay her $50 for training. She showed me around the place and said that my pay would be $4.50/hour as a car hop. This was in 2010, and all the tips I made went into a bucket with all the other girls' tips. At the end of the night, she counted up tips, kept 20% for herself and split the rest up evenly among every employee. Also, part of our job was 1 day a week we had to spend 4 hours cleaning her house. It seemed super shady. I literally left after listening to her go over all these rules. My dad was pissed until I explained, and another girl confirmed and my dad agreed I did the right thing. Next story. Went into an Italian restaurant for my first day of work and I got 3 red flags on the very first day. 1, the manager said he had lots of hours for me and getting shifts would be no problem. Every single other employee told me that they were struggling for hours and that they had no idea why they hired me. 2, everyone said the manager was in butthole. Even the customers. 3, it was my first day there, and I actually had to teach the woman training me how to do 1 or 2 things. Next story. I was hired at a chain restaurant to be a hostess. I was so excited because my last job was washing dishes and because of my eczema, I had to quit. It was too painful to do that job. So, I arrived at my new job dressed up to be a hostess and those first took me back to the kitchen to do dishes because the dishwasher just quit. I noped out of there real fast. Next story. Salesman for Kirby Vacuums. First sale call was to a single elderly woman who was supporting her son in hospital. They got us in the door by offering a free carpet clean as a demonstration. The supervisor training me pushed and pushed to make the sale until this old woman was in tears. Just as she was about to sign the paperwork I asked if she actually wanted to vacuum and she said it was lovely but she couldn't afford it. I took the paperwork away from her and said not to worry. Outside I told the supervisor I quit, to which he replied I would have been fired anyway. No love lost. I hung around for half an hour playing on my phone to make sure the supervisor left because he was a real piece of work. Next story. I interviewed for a professional marketing assistant and got the job straight away. I was under the impression that I would be an assistant to the man I was interviewed by. When I showed up for my first day, the same waiting room I was in the previous day was full of people. I quickly learned that we were all hired, and that I would be a door-to-door salesperson selling some pretty useless crap. I spent my entire day inside a Starbucks applying for other jobs and went home, got paid, but never went back. Next story. Not me, but I was training a new lifeguard. After our shift was mandatory staff training for our entire crew, where we practice rescues. Once she found out we actually had to practice and go in the water, she just walked out. Not really sure what kind of job she thought she had signed up for. Next story. I technically quit before my first day. I got hired at a well-known gift store. I was hired with the understanding that I would work Saturdays, Sundays, and a grand total of 8 hours a week, so 2 4-hour shifts. Also at minimum wage. Not a problem with me, done that before. I would just pick up a part-time job for rest of the week. Nope, apparently that wasn't allowed. The manager thought that was a horrible thing and disrespectful to her. I should only work for them and only them, and I should have better control over my money if I can't survive on $64 a week before taxes. Yeah, didn't show up cause F that noise. She called pissed off that I wouldn't show up to such opportunity. Next story. I was a cashier at this cafeteria for a large company in my town. The people that worked at the company would put their tips in a bucket and the people made a lot of money, so there was like 10s and 20s. The manager of the cafe wouldn't let me have any of tips because she said that cashiers couldn't be trusted, so she would ship the tip money to a church in El Paso. I immediately knew that this was a load of crap and I just never went back. It's also illegal, I think, to collect money for one thing but do something else with it without disclosing who/what it is for. Next story. Started a new job unloading shipping containers and was told they had to be empty by midday. This was imperative because a new one was going to arrive in the early afternoon. It was a two-man job if we both worked our butt off to get it done. Boss says also your offsider is off work today, you will need to get this cleared. I just walked out. Even if it was a trial by fire, I wasn't interested in working for these jerks, F that. Next story. Ended up being a scam to try and get free labor. I went for a job interview as a security guard. A man and a woman asked me my name, asked me how strong I was, then hired me and asked me to start immediately. That started alarm bells ringing, 2 questions in an interview, and I am employed and working with no discussion about anything else. They took me down to their warehouse, office interview was above it, and told me to start moving boxes from a shelf into a truck. I said hang on, the job is security not manual labor, and then they started getting really crappy with me and saying if you want the job then you need to do this as part of it. I was like yeah nah, I am out, and walked out. Total scam. There was no job and it really pissed me off because I could have gone to another interview at that time but choose to go there instead. Next story. I had a job for one day selling home security equipment door to door. The whole idea was basically to make it seem like you're doing them a service and then lock the customer into 5-year contracts. My supervisor and I were in this one home of a family that hardly some English. The father said they had been struggling with finances, but my supervisor kept pushing it on them, and the customer seemed like he didn't fully understand what was going on. I couldn't in good conscience take these people that were already struggling and put them in a worse position. Next story. I answered an ad for a babysitting job. I was already working on a casual basis, but it was sporadic, so I thought some after-hours babysitting would be welcome extra cash. The couple were both in the military and proceeded to tell me that I would be staying in the spare room and looking after their 6-month-old child around the clock as well as doing the housework. I would have 1 day off every 2 weeks. They said it is cash in hand so I could sign on to the dole, unemployment benefit, to make up the rest of the money. I left on the spot. They wanted a live-in housemaid and nanny, not a babysitter, and they were not able to pay for one. Why they thought it was up to me to illegally collect the dole to subsidize them I don't know.